The Democratic Party does have an emergency right now. That emergency is boomerism.
What powers would the invocation of their Insurrection Act hand to Trump?
It's a power basically to use the military in the United States. It usually portends a desire for the administration or for the president to use overwhelming force in some context. If you really want to deport tens of millions or even just millions of illegal immigrants or people who are here without or undocumented, you're going to see the kind of reaction that you're seeing in California, because a lot of these people are neighbors, they're uncles, they're aunts, they're not committing crimes. And so there's a humongous cost here.
When you look at how Elon's acted, honestly, my reading on it is massively impulsive drug addict. Like, at least with Trump, if Trump throws a little child tantrum, he's not going to back down on that shit.
No.
He's just going to double and triple and quadruple down. Elon threw a little tantrum, then 2 days later, tail tucked between his legs. I'm sorry if I offended you. Please don't cut off my money.
Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description.
So we got a lot going on, Pisco. There is a lot going on for us to talk about. Let me start with this, because I saw this last night. I haven't been able to do a segment on it yet, but I feel like it's super important. Democratic leaders are currently fighting about how to respond to Trump effectively invading LA. You have some people who are in the camp of like, you got to do what Gavin Newsom is doing, and you have to fight him. And then you have other people who are set on this idea that, well, it's a distraction, so like, don't talk about it. And it kind of reminds me of the Kilmar-Abrego-Garcia thing, where a bunch of centrist Democrats said you have to shut up about Kilmar because you're taking the bait and you're fighting on Trump's terms, an area where he's strong, like immigration. And so what's your reaction to that? Because when I see that, I honestly want to pull my damn hair out, because here's a golden opportunity to do what the base wants you to do, and most of these people are nowhere to be found.
No, time after time, it's been shown that if Democrats take an assertive position, they come out on top. And the proof is in the pudding. Look at the Kilmar-Abrego-Garcia story. What if we had listened to the people who said, don't focus on this because Trump generally is stronger in immigration? Okay, take that as granted that he's generally stronger in immigration. But if Democrats don't start taking a hold of messaging and leading, then we're never going to get anywhere. And who knows, maybe Kilmar-Abrego-Garcia would never be back. At some points, we just have to do what's right, either under the law or just like in terms of our own ethics. And here we have a clear case where Trump is invoking a power that says that, he can federalize the National Guard, but only the National Guard, and only when the orders are going through the governor, which of course he's not consulting Gavin Newsom. And of course he's deploying the Marines when it's not necessary. And so there are a lot of reasons why, on principle, Democrats should stand up to this kind of authoritarian maneuver. And if you lead in a strong fashion, the people will follow you. You can, have a sentence for condemning like the worst violence and stuff and the obnoxious people, but don't do like what people like Fetterman are doing.
Oh my God.
Prostrate yourself and accept the framing of the MAGA Republicans.
Well, and Fetterman was like, Democrats need to understand. This is what it's like. Find me a Democrat who's been like, yay, violence.
Riots.
I mean, there isn't one. There literally is.
Yeah,
even I saw Bernie Sanders put out something that was like, so he's just, I don't know. He was having dinner with Steve Bannon on his wedding anniversary. Who knows what's going on with that dude?
He's going to go full MAGA. I think he's going to go full MAGA.
It looks like he's setting up for that.
Yeah.
He might, and you're right. AOC said something against it. Sanders said something against it back in 2020. Biden condemned it. So there's not this huge clutch of Democrats who are secretly conniving. And like a lot of these, the most violence of the protesters or rioters, whatever you want to call them, they don't even like these people. And so we should not play scared. And especially when there's the contrast to the other side, where their actual representatives are supporting, for example, wide-scale pardons of terrorists and insurrectionists on January 6th.
That's exactly right.
I can't take a word the right says about law and order seriously. It makes me want to put my nuts in a waffle iron, because these people, you just pardoned 1,600 insurrectionists. Over 400 were violent. Over 100 of them assaulted cops. Mm-hmm. They pardoned them. Some of them, by the way, later came out. They were fredophiles.
Right.
One of them was drunk driving and killed somebody by driving on the wrong side of the road. Never would have happened if Trump did not pardon their ass.
I think it's actually a real problem for that. They got Pete Hegseth in his testimony in front of Congress this week, too. I can't remember. Oh, I think it was Chris Murphy, who was like, so you're into federalizing the National Guard here. Did you support it after January 6th to protect the Capitol? And he was like, well, and he tried to shift it to, remember how Pete Hegseth was supposed to be part of that National Guard contingent, and then they wouldn't let him because of his like weird, Christian crusader tattoos or whatever. So he tried to shift to talk about that, but it was very uncomfortable. And I think that, I actually think that is a very effective line that they have no answer for deployed against them. But to your point, Pisco, like on the politics of it, first of all, just like, don't focus test sometimes it's important to stand for something and people want to see you fighting. And I think maybe the biggest problem with the Democratic Party at this point is people see them finger in the wind, afraid of their own shadow, too afraid to stand up for things that they claim to care about. So that's number one. Number two, on the polling of it, when Trump really started to decline in terms of his immigration approval rating in particular was at the peak of when people were focused on Kilmer Abrego Garcia, because it actually is this important strategy to go after him in the areas where he is the strongest. So if immigration is a bright spot for him, the fact that you have this case in point of the horrendous ways that he goes about this with incredible cruelty, in defiance of due process, in a way that is, incredibly consequential, not just for immigrants, but for every single person in the United States of America. Like, of course, you should absolutely exploit that. And at this point, the proof is in the pudding. Like, it's undeniable that was not only the right strategy ethically and morally, it was also very clearly the correct strategy politically.
You're absolutely right. Like, in terms of pure pragmatic politics, they're overstepping, and people actually do care about arguments. I know firsthand, because when I went on Tim Pool to debate the Kilmer Abrego Garcia issue, I had a lot of messages, including from Tim Pool's dad. I actually think Tim Pool's dad is a bit of a lefty, but he messaged me saying, "You are absolutely correct," because people do care about arguments. And in a way, if you're just putting aside the ethics of it, it's a political gift when they overstep like this, because you can deal in like the most clear case of the overstepping and like have that be the fertile ground. Just like, by the way, the right does whenever they have some lefty that goes like maybe a little bit too far, or the most dramatic interpretation of an argument, they take that argument and use that as a sort of sandbag for everyone else. And so you should deploy that tactic. And here you don't, the polling shows, the polling argument isn't even correct on the part of like the people who are telling you to be scared, because they don't agree with the deployment of the Marines. Here we have a violation of posse comitatus. Every like military person that you've ever talked to, I used to be a bartender and I would talk to these people, they always say, it's so ingrained in the military, it's so ingrained in the Marines that you don't get deployed against Americans, you don't get deployed against Americans. And so this is like a very evocative thing that people understand. Trust your fellow American and make the argument.
Yeah. So I actually just saw some polling on this earlier. Apparently the approval rating for congressional Democrats in the country is 21%. And even when you ask Democratic voters what they think of congressional Democrats, it's only 41%.
Yeah.
And remember, this is at the exact same time where Trump's approval rating is completely imploding. His is imploding. But it's not like at the same time that's happening, Democrats are going up because of what you mentioned, which is like, I can't tell you the last time I've seen a Democrat just say what they believe. Like, something bad happens that the right does, and then it's just like, hey, that's really fucked up, bro. You don't get that. And in fact, I think we're going through it again right now with all the reporting around Iran, that Netanyahu is gearing up to attack Iran. I'm seeing everything. I'm fucking losing my mind on Twitter. I'm throwing tweet storms out there on a regular basis. And I don't know if I've seen a single Democratic politician be like, no war with Iran, right? Like, it's always, and then say some disingenuous shit that you don't actually believe. So I think that's, to your point, Krystal, I think that's the biggest problem they face is like, do you guys actually believe anything?
They just
do you
come
care
across
about
as
any of
so weak.
But do you even care about any of this?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
he federalizes the California National Guard, then he sends the Marines into LA over a day or two of anti-ICE protests, and you got nothing to say about it?
Yeah.
Like, are you totally fine with that?
Not to mention, Pisco, that's what I want to hear you more on. Hegseth got asked this question. Hey, so there's nothing in this order that limits it to LA. So is it limited to LA, or is this something you're thinking about more broadly? And Hegseth,
They're definitely thinking broadly.
was like basically acknowledged that this could be, troops could be deployed anywhere in the country. And we had Trump come out and say, any protesters, with regards to his military parade this weekend, any protesters would be met with force. Not violent protesters, any protesters would be met with force. we know from the beginning of his administration, he's been searching for a pretext to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would give him even more broad powers. So, what do you think? Where are we right now?
Yeah.
And what do you see as the risks being of this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct that they've been thinking about this for a long time. It's in Project 2025. It's funny, actually, they're talking about invoking the Insurrection Act and all that stuff. But on January 6th, the DC National Guard is actually technically under the purview already of the federal government. And even there, it took forever for them to actually mobilize them. So it's funny over like nothing or over a threat that certainly doesn't require federalizing the National Guard when everyone in the state is telling you they don't need it. They're willing to do so now. But yeah, I do think they have designs on it being further than just California. And no, the terms of the executive order don't limit it, strictly speaking, to California. My question is, where's Chuck Schumer? Why aren't you on the streets? Why isn't Hakeem Jeffries on the streets? You see the passion in the crowds. You can distance yourself from the people who do crimes and the people who do like violence and throw bricks. You can do that. You can walk that line. Democrats have done it before. But you should be on the streets, like taking hold of the energy that your party is showing and actually leading, because you're right. This whole thing about the military style parade for Trump's birthday, very Kim Jong-un style. I mean, this is a dangerous time for the country. Look at how much we're the frog in the pot that has boiled. We're now talking about nationwide potentially deployments of Marines to put down protesters, like legal protesters, to a Trump-style military parade, where they're talking about military officials, like, I don't know, parachuting down to give Trump the key to the White House or something. I don't even know what they're doing. It's crazy. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that in terms of actually seeing where we are from like a legal or authoritarian perspective, it's pretty grave. Thankfully, there's a lot of energy from the Democrats and the left, and I think you guys have properly sort of diagnosed where it's at, to resist and actually be tough. And the reason why the Democratic approval is so low, and I count myself among the people, the Democrats or the left-wing people who disapprove the current Democratic leadership, is because they're too weak. And the minute you see a strong Democrat, or at least strong Democratic rhetoric from Gavin Newsom in terms of what he's saying, all of a sudden his approval goes up. All of a sudden people are talking about like a serious contender. That's all it takes, is some amount of resistance. And so, yeah, I think that you guys you're on the mark, and we are in a dangerous place vis-a-vis what the administration is trying to do.
So there actually already was reporting, and I talked about it on my show as well, that 5 big Democratic cities, Trump is already planning these massive ICE raids for 5 big Democratic cities. And you're going to see the same thing happen everywhere else that happened in LA. They're going to overreach. They're going to go after innocent people. That's going to lead to a backlash. People are going to be in the streets. Then he's going to use that to federalize the National Guard of the various states in question, maybe send in the Marines to other states as well. Mix that with nationwide protests that are planned for June 14th, which is the same day he has his fascist military parade, right? And as you said, he said, no protests. Will use very heavy force against anybody who protests. He didn't say riots. He said protests. So we're actually looking at a very, very dangerous situation where there's going to be millions of people in the streets, no doubt about it, on June 14th. And the question is, how is he going to react? Given he's already planning the ICE raids in the 5 big Democratic cities, he's already used California as the canary in the coal mine and his testing grounds, and I think he found, hey, I'm kind of getting away with it, even though there are lawsuits over it. I mean, he just does stuff and worries about the consequences later, right? And so I do think June 14th is going to be a very scary date for a number of reasons, because we're already there. Like, just when, I forget who said it. Was it Bernie or was it Gavin Newsom? Oh, we're moving towards authoritarian. No, we're there already. We have to stop with this. Oh, maybe we're going to. No, it's already here, bro. It's already here. And I don't think people have really woken up to that fact.
That's why I want to also take a point of personal privilege. I've been arguing a lot in the trenches about cases like the Mahmoud Khalil case or Meza Ozturk case, and even the recent detention, brief as it was, of Hassan Piker because of First Amendment grounds. And I get a lot of pushback from people for whoever reason, don't like these people's politics, don't support Palestine, or who don't like Hassan Piker for various reasons. But we have to put aside like the pettiness and just recognize the administration for what it's doing. Yeah, we've crossed the threshold. They're revoking green cards, they're revoking student visas on the basis of First Amendment protected activities. And yeah, this kind of activity and this kind of tendency extends to U.S. citizens, U.S. institutions like Harvard, other things, businesses who are having their contracts, if they're engaging with law firms that the administration doesn't like, they're having their contracts canceled. So all of this is affecting U.S. citizens. It's all unpopular. All it takes is some leaders with the ganas, with the desire to call it out properly. And so, yeah, I think that on June 14th, we better see some Democratic leaders out on the streets. And if we don't, we have a real problem. Instead, they seem to be focused, and I'm so disappointed in Ken Martin for doing this, on like expelling David Hogg.
That's right.
From being vice chair. I mean, talk about priorities.
I was going to ask you about that, about the David Hogg thing. I mean, here you have a guy. Here you have a guy who honestly just expressed what I would describe as the minimal acceptable amount of desire for change. And I say minimal because in the midst of saying we need younger Democrats who have better ideas, he also went out of his way to be like, hey, I love Hakeem Jeffries. I love some of these Democratic leaders that we have, right? And so that's him playing from within the system, playing the game where he's saying, hey, if somebody's like 87 years old and they can't talk, maybe then can we run a primary against them? And they destroyed him as a result of it, and they did it in the most DNC way possible, which is to say, actually, your election violated the gender clause that we have.
Right, Section 17.
We need a woman of color in your spot, please.
We're gonna redo
and it's like,
this.
and somebody made this point.
It's
they were like,
wild.
They were like, how can you? Democrats are struggling with young men right now. And then you did something which, like, by definition, is the most alienating thing you could do for young men, because you're saying, fuck this young man, let's bring in somebody else who doesn't want to change shit.
Right.
So it's like the worst case scenario.
So I want to say, I know you guys have some problems with the abundance folks and the abundance narrative. And listen, I have some problems as well. I have some things I agree with them. I think everyone kind of has this approach. But there's one great point in the book, which is you define your own emergencies, right? The administration right now is defining their emergencies in terms of the invasion from Tren de Aragua, the border crises that they're declaring to do all their authoritarian measures. And the Democratic Party does have an emergency right now. That emergency is boomerism. We have lost. That is to say, 3 congressmen that are Democrats died this year after they were inaugurated or after they were, put into office because they were too old or sick or whatever. We are too old. We had Dianne Feinstein die in office. We had Ruth Bader Ginsburg die in office. This is an emergency. And so in that context, when we have Democrats dying left and right, when we need to invigorate some youth into what's going on, to have the Democrats so resistant to change in the presence of that emergency, to be clinging to the old, for example, Andrew Cuomo out of the city for the mayoral, or clinging to these old people who have like incumbents that have had their seats forever. I think that is a sign that they're not learning. And it's crucial that we learn in this times because we're not going to get a second chance at our republic.
Yeah, well, that was Hogg's real crime, was going after James Clyburn. That was what really sort of did him in, because God forbid you say anything about how, hey, these like 80-year-olds who lead the party, maybe it's time for them to move on. And that was it. It was curtains for him.
An 87-year-old is running for re-election, Eleanor Holmes Norton.
I know.
87.
I know. Insane. As if DC doesn't already have, like, get the short end of the stick in terms of any sort of political representation. But, Pisco, I also wanted to ask you about the, like, legal justification for the National Guard being federalized and the deployment of the Marines. Like, that even seems more tenuous to me. I know Gavin Newsom has sued the Trump administration over this. There's hearings that are going to happen today. It's Thursday, so by the time this is out, that we'll have some information about what went down there. But, you know, what do you think of their legal justification? And then if he does decide to invoke the Insurrection Act, what sort of powers would that entail? And, you know, what kind of legal ground would he be on then?
So I think it's pretty apparent and clear that they're violating the law. The law says quite clearly that under 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, that when you nationalize or federalize the National Guard or call them into federal service, you need to make sure the orders are going through the governors. And the policy reason for that is clear. Like the framers were very concerned about this like split up of who controls the militia, under what conditions you can call forth a militia. The National Guard is like the equivalent of the militia. They have a dual role. Usually they're under the control of the state governors who are the commander in chief of their respective, state militias. But sometimes in the times of the most pressing needs, the president can call forth the militia. Some of these early acts were called, the Calling Forth Acts or the Militia Acts. And so they detail very sort of specifically when those powers are invoked. And if you read the text of 10 U.S.C. 1246, it says clearly that orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states. It's not even debated whether or not these orders are going through Gavin Newsom. They're not. Everyone acknowledges they're not. The memo on its face, the executive order on its face, says that the Secretary of Defense is the one who's issuing all these orders. They're not consulting with Gavin Newsom. So on the legal question, obviously Gavin Newsom, in my opinion, is correct on the proceduralism of it. it. But that doesn't mean that the court can resolve the question. What these sort of the federal courts that we have right now, what they like to do is give a lot of deference to the president in their determinations, right? So they might say that this is a political question, that they can't get involved there, that the courts are not fit to resolve these kinds of questions. That is what you should be scared of. And that's the same kind of rationale the Trump administration is constantly pushing for. The Trump versus United States, like unitary executive, you can't question what the president says, the Russell Voughts of the world. That vision of the executive branch is looming large. And so we should be careful. Even if there is a violation here, it's not clear that the courts are going to be able to resolve it. Now, what if he actually does invoke the Insurrection Act? That tells you that there's probably stronger legal footing in terms of commanding and controlling the various National Guard components there. And so I think that they are testing the limits by using this kind of authority where it's not clear that they can do it under this authority for just to see that, test whether or not the courts are able to resolve this question when there's a clear violation. And the implication of that, only time will tell. There's a huge constitutional crisis waiting to happen. We're already in the crisis, really. And so if he does invoke the Insurrection Act on some bullshit, I don't know that a court's going to step in and say, we disagree with you on your determinations as to what is needed.
But, it is at its core a factual question, though, right, about whether or not the Insurrection Act is merited. And we found with the alien enemies deportations that four courts said, you're stretching the definition of the word invasion to mean something that it clearly does not mean. So we are slapping down you invoking this law. And part of me feels like that would happen in this case, too. But the problem I struggle with, Pisco, is that you have Trump will do something which on the face of it seems wildly illegal. Then like 4 or 5 months later, a court will be like, you can't do that. Then like maybe 2 or 3 courts will jump in and say, yeah, you can't do that. But then he just could just keep doing it and then nothing happens, right? And it's like, how did we get here? Why can't it actually be like, no, if you don't do this, like you're, I don't know, immediately, impeachment is immediately triggered or something like that. Like to have a court say something and then you disregard it, and then another court says it, you still disregard it. It's like that is the uncharted territory that we're in, right? Is that you have a regime that has zero respect for the rule of law, and they'll just plow ahead. And like we were talking about with the Democrats, they never really seize on any one of these things and say, that's it, we need to impeach over this and like get the ball rolling. It's just like another day that ends in Y.
But I think that you're right on the money there, which is where they're feeling the pain is in the public polling and the public outcry, right? The court's inherent ability, they have neither the strength of the pen of the sword or of the purse. They have the power of their convincing, right? Whether or not their opinions make sense to the American people and whether or not they are able to convince the American people. So what was the whole thing with the Kilmar-Abrego-Garcia case? He was in violation of the Supreme Court's order for so long. But the pressure, and yeah, they indict him on something. And we'll take a look at that indictment. No one ever said that we know for certain that he didn't commit a crime, although I'm very suspect about the charges against Kilmar-Abrego-Garcia. One of the prosecutors already quit. And I think some of the evidence they have is tenuous at best, but we'll take a look at that. And maybe he did commit a crime. But he was brought back to the United States. And in some sense, the administration got into compliance with the Supreme Court's order there. And the reason there is because there was a public pressure, there was public outcry, and it was successful, and it brought him back in a way that wouldn't have happened, I think, if people just ignored it. And so when we have these court rulings and we stress, like you and Krystal are doing constantly, he's breaking the law, he's in violation of court orders, he's in violation of court orders, that's where the cost is going to be when we get to the other members of the political branches of our government, either state or federal, and also just the general public, and start to really hammer that this is a lawless administration, and you will see the public follow.
What powers would the invocation of their Insurrection Act hand to Trump?
It would give him control over these components of the National Guard. It would potentially give him the ability to deploy non-National Guard military members. You have to think about this in the context of like the Civil War, right? Mm-hmm. In the Civil War, you had President Lincoln having, Army regulars marching into parts of, Virginia and the Carolinas and things like that. And so it's a power basically to use the military in the United States. The last time it was invoked, I think, was for the LA riots in the 90s, which were much worse than what you're seeing right now in terms of the ICE riots. It's like the ICE riots right now, or the ICE protests, they're nothing in comparison to the LA riots of the 90s. And the invocation there was done with like the consent of the governor. And so it's a big deal because it usually portends like a desire for the administration or for the president to use overwhelming force in some context. And it would give authorities to like override the Posse Comitatus Act, which is the general rule that you can't, as a military official, be used and deployed for like regular law enforcement in the country. And so what powers does that unlock? Basically the power to use the military for your own ends.
Wow.
In what scenario do you foresee us ever having a serious conversation about impeachment? Because I am astonished and blown away on a daily basis the number of actions that are illegal from this regime. I mean, even if you just want to narrow the conversation to Trump's corruption, here's a guy who's taken tens of millions, potentially even hundreds of millions of dollars from the government of Saudi Arabia for the live golf events at his courses. He's taken $100 million from Miriam Adelson, $200 million from Sheldon Adelson. He never divested from his businesses, even though he pretended to in the first term. Now he's not even pretending. He made $160 million from foreign countries as president. He's selling NFTs. He has a crypto exchange. He has his scam meme coin. He has trading cards, watches for $100,000, the plane, the $400 million plane from Qatar. Jared took $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. He has a $500 million project with Oman. If you want to go back to the first term, his charity was a fraud. His university was a fraud. He stiffed his workers for his casinos and hotels. He did tax fraud, insurance fraud, business fraud. And I didn't even say anything yet about, for example, the impeachable things when it comes to foreign policy. We have no declaration of war for Yemen. And he's been bombing Yemen for a long time. What is it going to take for Democrats to wake up and for people to start honestly and seriously having a conversation about impeachment, even if you have Republicans who, we're not doing it, we would never do that. Well, okay, let's have that political fight. Let's have that be the focus of the conversation. Let's hammer away on that and show everybody how immensely lawless this man is to, in turn, drive the poll numbers down and drive the Republican poll numbers down. Do you foresee any scenario where we would be having the conversation about impeachment?
I think impeachment is definitely the sole power of the House of Representatives, and it completely and totally relies on their willingness to draw up articles of impeachment. And what you've just outlined are tons of impeachable conduct. You know, I'll throw in there abuse of power for the pardons of the Jan 6ers. Even though people, the president has the power to do a bunch of actions, you need to have a power in order to abuse the power, right? So if you're using your powers for unauthorized or for illegitimate purposes, right, to self-enrich, to free your cronies who are co-conspirators in your criminal activities, or, for example, all the bribery events that you just listed out. Of course, that's impeachable conduct. Of course, that article should be drawn up. But it's a political question at this point: is what will it take for House Republicans to, grow a backbone and to defy Trump? And if you've been watching this movie, the answer is almost nothing. What we have in front of a Congress right now, what they're focusing on, is the big, beautiful bill. This is a bill that's going to explode the debt. It is a bill that's going to slash Medicaid and food stamps for like the poorest Americans. It's going to slash even like EV credits that help, or some of these Inflation Reduction Act credits that help even some predominantly like right-wing states. It's increasing the military budget to like $1 trillion and increasing immigration budgets by huge amounts of money, and all in the context of the Republicans for years and years and years screaming about the deficit, screaming about the debt and all that kind of thing. And the only votes that we can muster among House Republicans to vote against it are like Thomas Massey and one other guy and someone to vote present. So like in that bill, it should be an anathema to the House Freedom Caucus. They voted for it. And some version of it will probably pass the Senate as well. And so when you're asking me what will it take for impeachment, it seems like there's very little appetite in Congress for Republicans to fight against Trump. And I think that once Trump starts pushing the buttons of some key House or holdouts, it's very likely that they're going to even bend on this bill. It's funny, like the one moment where you might see some resistance is if Trump starts getting petty, like he did with Elon and now what he's doing with Rand Paul. Like Rand Paul's invitation to this sorbet or this White House picnic or whatever was disinvited. I've never seen Rand Paul so incensed by anything, which I guess is like fucking ridiculous, but excuse my French, but whatever. I mean, I guess you take your wins when you can.
Well, apparently Trump has now invited him, so that's all. That's all in the past.
What that proves is what Rand Paul did was correct, where he brought it up. And said, the president's acting really petty. He disinvited me from this thing, and that's fucking absurd. And then Trump was like, you weren't supposed to tell anybody, Rand. Yeah, you're definitely welcome, Rand. We love you.
It was funny, though, that Rand Paul was like,
I lost my respect.
So much respect. It was like, this is the thing. This is your line? Okay. That's incredible. But yeah, they're all good now. He's invited to the picnic. So that has been,
Thank God.
fence has been mended. That's the one I've been struggling with today.
Yeah.
The other thing with the big, beautiful bill that fits together with the LA crackdown and invasion is Stephen Miller is really trying to rebrand the bill as not being about a giant tax cut for the rich at the expense of working class people, which is what it broadly is. He's trying to rebrand it as an immigration bill, which it is. I mean, the numbers, the amounts that are going to ICE and to these private prison contractors to massively expand detention centers is extraordinary. And it really is, the budget priorities in this bill are, number one, give tons of money to the oligarchy. Number two, screw the working class. And number three, mass immigrant cruelty. But I think that's the other sort of political thing that they're trying to play out here with regard to their actions in LA. And Stephen Miller's been online aggressively going after Rand Paul and Thomas Massie, saying basically like, you don't support Trump's immigration agenda because you're opposed to this bill. So I think that's the other part of what they're doing here, because they feel like they're on stronger ground politically when they're talking about immigration, even though I think what we said before is true, that they've like vastly overreached here in ways that, listen, Stephen Miller, the whole country is not a bunch of like psycho white nationalist neo-Nazis like you are. The rest of the country is not looking at these things the way that you are, but that's the way that he thinks.
And the projections are all lies too, which you guys have talked about before. They take like the rosiest assumptions of like some ridiculous GDP growth. They lied to like the Senate parliamentarian. So it's all bullshit. But the truth is, you're right. They're trying to paint this as an immigration bill because they know the American people broadly have the sense that they are against illegal immigration. They want to deport people. But the truth is, the cost isn't just in this bill, right? So it is true, right, that they're spending billions and billions and millions of dollars to do these deportations, to do the border wall stuff. But if you really want to do mass deportation, there have been some projections that say like $1 trillion over 10 years. As an American, do you really want to spend $1 trillion on mass deportations and, screw over your GDP growth? Because we have many independent studies that show that, immigration is a benefit and a boon to the economy. You're going to destroy a bunch of industries. You're going to destroy like in terms of if you want to buy a house, who do you think is in all these construction jobs? So this is just a horrible policy that's going to cost a lot of Americans in terms of both the fiscal health, but also other corollary economic effects. And then it's not, you're just going to find all these criminals lying around. It's very easy. I've heard Kyle before talk about this. They're already, like Biden was going after the easiest apples on the tree, right? They're going after the criminals and they're prioritizing the criminals under Biden and Obama. But if you really want to deport tens of millions or even just millions of illegal immigrants or people who are here or are undocumented, it's going to cost you like going into homes, going into neighborhoods. And you're going to see the kind of reaction that you're seeing in California because a lot of these people are neighbors, they're uncles, they're aunts, they're not committing crimes. And so there's a humongous cost here and a huge, I think, opportunity for Democrats optically and in terms of messaging to take advantage if they're not playing scared.
Here's the other thing, Pisco, that I think they've put on, they've really demonstrated unambiguously. If you have in your head some idea that a mass deportation policy is only going to impact undocumented immigrants, you're a fool. You're an absolute fool. It's going to require a massive security state surveillance effort, the Palantir database. It's going to sweep up American citizens. Because
it already has.
And it already has. Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you are going to really set about this project of deporting every single undocumented immigrant in the country, guess what? You are going to have to, with your surveillance, touch every American, every citizen, and every non-citizen to figure out who is who. It is going to entail a huge expansion of the police state, of the surveillance apparatus. That's just how it is, which is why when I see, some of the new like Trump-aligned libertarians who are on board with this, I'm like, how can it not occur to you the way that this is not just going to infringe on the rights of undocumented. It's not just going to tear up families that are, have mixed status, neighborhoods that have large immigrant. This touches everyone. And, I think that to go back to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, part of why people were so appalled by that is because they realized if there's no due process for him, there's no due process for anyone, because that means you're not even showing them in court to prove like I'm an American citizen. They could just disappear literally anyone. And that principle really does apply across the board.
It's the same principle, by the way, that's at issue for some of what they want to do for like the new requirements on Medicaid, right? That the cost of implementing these measures, the cost of actually going through the labor of checking, for example, all the U.S. citizens, or checking the databases to make sure that you're actually working, or that you actually have like a qualified condition to get some of these funds. And weeding out the quote unquote undeserving, that's going to impose costs on the deserving, right? Just like in the same way as the surveillance state, that some of these means tested measures are going to just result in less Americans, for example, having access to Medicaid who would otherwise be eligible. Or for example, in the context of the surveillance state hypothetical, people who have nothing, who haven't done anything wrong, or who are here legally, or who have done it the right way. And so, yeah, it absolutely, if you don't think that a massive expansion of the surveillance state, a massive expansion of ICE, or of the use of the military domestically won't have an effect on regular Americans who have done nothing wrong, then it's a joke. Obviously it will. And we've heard these arguments before under the Bush neocons, right? Back in the day, the Patriot Act, that kind of thing, that if you have nothing to fear, you have nothing to hide. How did it work out then? And so yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that if this bill passes and if the administration gets what it wants, it absolutely will expand the surveillance state. And you've talked about the Palantir stuff. These guys are all in bed together, right? These are all, the crypto fascists, these tech libertarian people. They're all in it together. They're colluding. They're part of the administration. And so 100%, you need to be afraid of them.
To get back to what I was saying about impeachment, so I was going over the numbers the other day, and it's really astonishing. Less than 1% of immigrants in this country are both undocumented and violent criminals, less than 1%. So that works out to 10,000 or fewer undocumented immigrant violent criminals. There's already been 100,000 ICE arrests under this Trump regime. They've raided schools, meatpacking facilities, farms, Home Depots, 7-Elevens. There was a 4-year-old American citizen with cancer who was deported without medicine. There was a woman who had just given birth who was arrested by ICE after a community outcry in that scenario. That woman was thankfully let go. There was an American citizen who actually didn't speak English and spoke Mayan and was arrested and held for a week. This is even after that person's mother showed up and showed both his birth certificate and his social security card. They still held him for a while after that. You have a U.S. Marshal who was arrested, who was released when they realized, oh, this guy's a U.S. Marshal. He just happens to be Hispanic. I guess we got to let him go. You have an American from Puerto Rico who's a veteran who was arrested. You, of course, have the 288 people who were sent to CCOT, the concentration camp in El Salvador. And this is, anywhere from 75 to 90% of the people who were sent there have been reported as not even having a criminal record. How is this not impeachable? This alone, isn't this impeachable?
I totally think that it's impeachable. I think that a deliberate, willful denial of due process, a deliberate, willful denial of rights in these policies, I think that, yes, that's absolutely impeachable in my mind. And they know that this is in violation of court orders, and they know it's in violation of people's rights, and they're doing it anyway. Did you see the news, by the way, Kyle or Krystal, that apparently the Trump administration is cooperating? This is, I think, from ProPublica. It's like Bukele and Trump are cooperating to release the leaders of MS-13 because Bukele came to a deal with the leaders of MS-13 in exchange for not doing as much violence, to funnel money, NGO money or USAID money directly to these leaders of the gang, and that's why they're releasing the leader of MS-13. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
That was originally reported by DropSite.
DropSite's been reporting on this for a little while, and I haven't read the ProPublica report, so I'm sure they may have more details. But yeah, basically the idea is that Bukele had struck a deal with a bunch of these leaders of MS-13 for the things that we were talking about, you can do your violence over here, but not in the tourist areas, or hey, in an exchange, I'll give you better conditions in prison, or I'll let you off the hook entirely. And he was worried about these MS-13 leaders spilling the tea in a courtroom in America. And so, there was an effort to, okay, we'll take your, the people you send here, but you got to let these certain MS-13 leaders off the hook. So it shows you, their real commitment to law and order, that they're sending Andre, the gay barber who did nothing wrong, including like was following process in terms of immigration, etc., into a slave labor camp for life and letting an actual MS-13 thug off the hook for whatever crimes that they've committed. I mean, that just tells you everything.
And it's part of those corrupt foreign dealings that Kyle referenced as, basis potentially for impeachment. It extends to Bukele, but it also extends obviously to the Middle East stuff right now. All of these people that they're sending to do the deals on tariffs, to do the deals, between Israel, Palestine, and the other Middle East country are horribly conflicted, including Trump himself in terms of the money that he's getting. And so we always have to question the motive of what the administration is doing vis-a-vis these foreign deals. For example, Qatar, who Trump himself said was a corrupt country that was sending terrorists around everywhere. Now he's going to accept this $400 million plane to be outfitted for another hundreds of millions of dollars of American taxpayer money, and then used for like a year or 2 years for his own purpose, and then not given to the next administration while he gets to use it in his presidential library or whatever. And so many of these foreign dealings, including with every country you can think of, are corrupt or show at least some kind of appearance of corruption, which he should, I think, recuse himself from. But there's no morals or ethics in this administration, and they don't care, and they're blatant about it. And so that's why we need, I think, strong people in the media, strong Democrats to call them out every single time they do something like this.
I think he feels like, how am I getting away with this? They're letting me do whatever I want. It's incredible.
So?
I really think he thinks that.
I think that's just his expectation, is that the world should bend to his every whim.
Think about what he said when they asked him about the $400 million Qatari plane. He was like indignant, like, what are you, stupid? Of course you take a plane if somebody offers you a plane. And it's like, that's so over the top. Like, we all know that if Joe Biden took a $400 million plane, he would be the most corrupt administration in history. But he was like, of course, what am I, stupid? Of course I'm going to take the plane. It's so over the top that it's like, you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing.
Pisco, what do you make of, like, how effective have the courts been at curtailing some of the Trump administration's, like, insane, unconstitutional behavior? Because on the one hand, they've acted in all but open defiance of certain court rulings. The Big Beautiful Bill, again, has some provision in there to try to keep courts from being able to hold this administration in contempt. On the other hand, I think a part of why they felt pressure to bring back Kilmer was because of all of the rulings that had gone against them. So it's not like the courts haven't mattered at all either. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that the lower federal courts have largely behaved admirably. The circuit courts, the district courts, I think that they're really wrestling with what's going on here. They're giving reasoned decisions, and they're wrestling with some of these like extreme cases that you wouldn't necessarily expect to have before them in other contexts. But, Trump is really stretching the limits of executive power, and I think they're doing admirably. But of course, the problems, I think, are with the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has been so, I think, frankly, a little bit biased in favor of Trump with their giving of stays of some of these lower court decisions. They've been flouting prior precedent. I think the one that comes to mind is there's a case called Humphrey's Executor. And it's an old case that has to do with like independent agencies and the ability for Congress to make independent agencies that have some kind of like removal protections for members of a multi-member like commission or something. Think like the Federal Trade Commission. Think the the FCC, things like that, or where it makes sense to have kind of independence from the executive branch. And this case, Humphrey's Executor, pretty much said that was okay under these kind of exceptions. But the court is now flouting that. And there was a recent decision that said, basically, we're not going to wade into the merits of some of these decision-making apparatuses of some of these agencies and things. And we're going to say basically that the administration can remove for cause a bunch of, members of the NLRB, things like that, who are supposed to be protected, right? Remember all the great things that Biden's NLRB did. And Trump basically fired and is making the NLRB not be functional. But the Supreme Court did, in like a completely dicta, a completely like advisory opinion, say, but don't worry about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, of course, is a category of its own. It is this like very unique thing. It's very grounded in history. It's complete bullshit. And so the court seems to be playing a game here, right? They have this expectation that if they do the right signals and they give Trump enough wins and they say, okay, don't touch the Federal Reserve, we'll protect Jerome Powell, that maybe that they can be listened to more. And I think it's a losing game. I think it's engaging in politics. And I think it's undercutting a lot of the work that the lower federal courts are doing.
Yeah, to your point, yeah, I found if you give these people an inch, they take a mile.
Yeah. Oh,
and I find the only way you can handle them is to just draw firm, bright red lines and be like, we are all saying no and we aren't budging a fucking millimeter. So think, for example, about the law firms, right? The law firms initially, some of them sort of semi-bent the knee, and we can kind of work with him. And then as soon as the other law firms realized, oh my God, it didn't stop with just what he was asking for with like DEI programs, then all the law firms were like, okay, all right, never mind. Nope, we're not doing this. Universities, same thing. And so it's kind of funny to me that like in real time, people have to relearn the lessons we already knew from history about fascism. That there is no negotiating with these people. It is. Go ahead.
100%. No. And the law firms, the point that Kyle's raising is so important. One of the decisions like quotes Shakespeare, and where the king is going after the lawyers in Shakespeare. All of your rights, right? What do rights mean if you're not able to defend them? And the right to have an attorney that is not handpicked by the government, or where the attorney's conduct isn't influenced by what the government says, is so important to every single other right. That's why I think the courts have come out so strongly against these corrupt deals that the Trump administration is trying to broker with some law firms that they're really pressuring, because it's foundational to all of our other rights. So when you don't have a lot of sympathy typically for some of these like white shoe law firms that make a lot of money, but you really have to think about it in a broader context. It's about chilling speech. It's about chilling dissent. It's about vindicating your right to counsel. And if they were successful in being able to pressure lawyers not to take on certain clients, right? That's what they were going after some of these law firms for like representing Democratic clients, representing Hillary Clinton, taking positions against the administration. That would be hugely damaging to all of your rights, because you need lawyers to vindicate all your rights. So what you just brought up is so important.
And what was the fallout for those law firms that did capitulate to Trump? Because it seems to me that there was kind of a elite versus grassroots response as well, where, the lower level lawyers, like the more junior associates, were disgusted with the decisions that were being made at the senior partner level.
Yeah, I won't get into specifics other than to say I think the results speak for themselves. And I think history will not be kind to the firms who took what I take to be the cowardly approach and bending the knee to the administration.
Yeah.
What do you make of, so this just came out not that long ago. Trump said, our great farmers and people in the hotel, hold on, let me make it bigger because it's actually blocked off. Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. In many cases, the criminals allowed into our country by the very stupid Biden open borders policy are applying for those jobs. This is not good. We must protect our farmers and get the criminals out of the USA. Changes are coming. So some people are looking at that and going, holy shit, is he like, reeling in Stephen Miller here a little bit and saying, wait a second, you're raiding too many Home Depots and you're taking too many innocent people and the farmers and out of the country and stuff. Can't have that. Or is it just like almost like virtue signaling to cover his ass while substantively keeping the policy the same while pretending like, oh, no, we've moderated. We're not going to go that far anymore.
It's the impossible game again, right? The same thing for tariffs. On the one hand, the tariffs are to bring back, to reshore manufacturing jobs, to bring back industries, but it's also to get the best trade deals possible. And for immigration, it's to maximally deport everybody. But of course, we don't want to affect the farmers. So it's trying to do incompatible policies. The reason why the Biden administration and previous Democratic administration focused on law breaking is because everyone kind of understands that we have a labor shortfall in some of these industries, including construction, including agriculture, where these jobs are needed. And so if you're already have limited resources to enforce anyway, you might as well enforce on the bad apples, the worst of the worst. And so unfortunately, economic realities have a way of moving people, not all the people, because, for example, I think a lot of members of certain unions, for example, the Teamsters union, voted against their interests when they voted for Trump. And so sometimes I think that, and even a left-wing ideology has a way to account for when people vote against their material interest. But I do think so. It's not just all material interest, but in general, I think that moves people. And so you are starting to see more complaints out of these industries, and maybe that's, caught wind in the White House.
Yeah, I get the sense that Trump has outsourced large pieces of his administration first he outsourced a bunch of it to Elon, right? And that part
How'd that go?
is over.
That was the worst thing ever.
It was
Worst
bad
decision anybody's
for
ever
the country.
made.
It was bad for Elon. It was bad for Trump. It didn't work really out well for anyone. And then he seems like he's outsourced the immigration policy really kind of wholly to Stephen Miller. And I don't know. There were those moments where he either was playing dumb or he seemed like he was genuinely confused about what the Supreme Court had said about Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He seemed to genuinely believe that he had the MS-13, like the preposterous Photoshopped photo was like
Nah, he was
actually,
lying on that.
actually real.
I think he was lying on that one.
But I do get the sense, I mean, the man, he's playing golf like every other day. I do get the sense that he's like checked out of some significant parts of his administration. And so, I don't think it's crazy to feel it. And he's kind of schizophrenic sometimes on immigration. Remember on the campaign trail, he said that thing about like, we're going to staple a green card to all the students like as they're graduating from college, which is a big priority of the tech right that they wanted to hear from him. So I'm not sure. Trump has a better political sense than just instinct than Stephen Miller. And Stephen Miller is an absolute like Nazi ideological psycho. And this is his thing. And he wants the country to be completely white. And he does not care if whether what he's doing is like popular or not. But if you look at the polling on deportations, yes, people want criminals deported. Below that, they don't really want mass deportations at all, especially when you're talking about like, roofers who have worked hard and paid their taxes and did nothing wrong and aren't criminals or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like a very small percentage of the country that actually wants to see people like that deported.
Well, Chris, let me ask you, who's running the show on Israel and Palestine in the White House?
That's a good question. I mean, I think
Miriam Adelson, who gave him $100 million. That's who's running it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Trump really cares that much. I think he's not that engaged with it. But I do think he's sort of in love with his like Maragaza idea of, the real estate brain kicks in on that.
Right. So I don't think that it's some based ideological position. I think, for example, Joe Biden ideologically has always been a big supporter of Israel, and that's kind of known. And he was very, everything you want to say about Joe Biden's failings mentally, cognitively, he was very much engaged on foreign policy from an ideological perspective in many cases, both on Ukraine and Israel. But what's the ideological root of Trump generally on some issues like tariffs? You can maybe see it, but I think that oftentimes it's whoever has his ear in a particular moment. You had reports that Mark Levine was going to the White House to try to sell him. You guys referenced the hopefully not going to be pending war with Iran. But I don't think that he is. I think he is. You're correct. In other words, outsourcing a lot of this policy, and sometimes the Stephen Millers of the world are in charge, and sometimes maybe he's going to listen to people who want more farmers or they want more H-1B visas, and it's not really a coherent ideological through line. The through line has always been adherence to the leader and loyalty to Trump, and so I think you're absolutely right.
Consolidation of power.
Yeah. I think it's a mix of things, right? Like it's every negative thing you can think of. I think ideologically he is genuinely very fascist. I think he's very pro-billionaire, but I also think, to your point, that he does delegate from time to time. Stephen Miller, I think, is in control of most of the immigration stuff. I even think there's a clip of him talking to somebody with Stephen Miller, and he goes, "This is the guy running my administration, Stephen."
When he was in the UAE or Saudi or something.
Yeah. So, but the corruption is also a big part of it. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, these are places that are going to get virtually whatever they want because they're willing to throw a tremendous amount of money at the Trump family, right? So, like, it's a whole mix of nothing but bad things. But before we wrap it up, let me ask you, Pisco, Elon Musk versus Trump. I'm sure you were having a good grand old time watching the fight as well. What the
Dude,
fuck,
I was
man?
on the plane, and it was this and the Prigozhin march on Moscow were like two of the best Twitter days of all time.
That was
and
crazy.
the memes,
Just wild.
The memes
Just
were insane.
wild.
Yeah. The best take, I think, or cope. There's like a bunch of different copes, but one of them is these are just two alphas, and this is what alpha men do, and this is very phallocentric as opposed to gynocentric.
That was,
really
God.
super hilarious. What were your guys' takes?
Well, the reason why it's even on my mind today is just how thoroughly Elon has cucked and humiliated himself. the fact that he basically apologized. I regret some of the stuff I said about President Trump.
But
right?
I think they both were embarrassing because Trump was very meek in his Elon accused him of being a pedo. Said, I
wish
won
him
the
well.
election for you.
I wish him well.
Said, your tariffs suck and are going to cause a recession. And, oh, by the way, you should be impeached and J.D. Vance should replace you. And Trump was the whole time very meek in his response and told J.D. Vance he should be diplomatic in his appearance on Theo Von. So I don't know.
Well, that's why I'm asking Pisco, right?
It's mutually assured destruction is what it feels like, right?
My read on it is that watching how sort of meek Trump was, other than cutting off the subsidies, which is relatively strong, but it feels like he thinks, oh, Elon might actually have some of the stuff Epstein has on me. Mm-hmm. Like he might have pictures, he might have videos, they might know, he might have some ace up his sleeve. He could also be thinking, damn, he's going to tell everybody about how he stole the election for me.
Well, think about how dumb Trump is technologically. Remember when he said that thing about Barron? Barron's really good with computers. I turned on his computer, and I came back, and he turned it back on.
And
it was back on. I was
said, how'd you do that? He said, don't worry about it, Dad. I said, what a genius.
He's looking at Elon. Elon's installed Starlink, and his Doge apparatchiks are going through all these databases. So, yeah, I'm sure he probably assumes that anything that is find-outable about him,
that Elon has on him.
It.
So he kind of reeled it in a little bit. But Elon, when you look at how Elon's acted, honestly, my reading on it is massively impulsive drug addict.
Yeah.
That it's like the New York Times report is true. He takes a cocktail of 20 drugs a day, including ecstasy and shrooms and ketamine and Adderall. And on that particular day, he had more uppers than downers, and he was in a bad mood. He felt slighted because Trump kicked out his NASA guy from the top position. He also felt slighted because the EV credits were not in the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah.
And so he had this moment of he's a baby. He gets everything he wants. He fucking berates everybody. Right? I want my things. You were in the Epstein files. It's like a child tantrum, right? But then after you do the child tantrum, at least with Trump, if Trump throws a little child tantrum, he's not going to back down on that shit.
No.
He's just going to double and triple and quadruple down. Elon threw a little tantrum, then 2 days later, tail tucked between his legs. I'm sorry if I offended you. Please don't cut off my money.
Yeah. What do you think, Pisco?
The thing is, it's bad either way, because I guess the good version of this story for Trump is you put a drug addict, loser who's going to throw tantrums like this in charge of the whole government as a minister without portfolio, cutting everything from USAID, causing thousands of people probably to die. And this guy was in charge of I don't know, the largest arson of our government agencies and government institutions in the history of the country. That's the good story. And everyone acknowledges now that Doge is a complete and total failure. Even Elon himself, even the Elon segments. There's no argument now that Doge was good or did anything good. The most you're hearing is Doge showed you the kind of style that we need, but it's not right now for the big, beautiful bill. And no one can even defend it a full force. But obviously the other side to this is, well, why the did Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, they were raising so much stink prior to this election, prior to their institution? Why was everyone talking about the imminent release of the Epstein files? Why did Pam Bondi do all this shit? And then now there's all this, they might have deleted some files. Who knows? Everyone. So there's a lot of sus shit going on here.
Not even who knows.
Yeah.
We've seen the camera. There actually were cameras. And he did kill himself, and everyone should just trust us and move on.
And Mr. Edgy Outsider Joe Rogan being like, really, bro? Bro, that's wild, bro. You spent fucking 4 years of your life being like, Epstein didn't kill himself, and look at the fucking autopsy report.
It defies all logic. No one buys this bullshit. Everyone who was trying to sell this story of the Epstein files for the longest time, and now you're dealt with the person closest to a shadow president that we've ever had, calling out Trump specifically. And the two solutions are Trump is completely incompetent and absolutely horrible at his job because he put a drug addict in charge of something, but he has no Epstein connection or there's nothing there. Or maybe there is a there and everyone is acting sus as fuck. And basically this is just a giant cover up, and it's a cover up of Trump.
But don't you also think Elon sort of knows he's cooked, so he felt like he had to apologize because
he's not going to get
his businesses are done, bro. Tesla, the base that bought Teslas, it was wealthy liberals. And now he's alienated every liberal and leftist in the country.
Yeah.
And so then what? You thought like MAGA was going to pick up the slack? No, they're buying Chevy Silverados and Ford F-150s, you dipshit. They're not going to buy a Tesla. And then on top of that, he just had 3 Starship planes that exploded.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
He lives off $8 million of government subsidies every day, $38 billion over the course of his career. Trump's now saying, maybe I cut that off. So he looked around and he went, I can't fucking make it in the free market. I'm gonna go belly up immediately. And so he felt like I have to apologize. I have to try to get back in his good graces. But if Trump is a real man, he will still cut off those subsidies.
He's not.
He should, yeah. No, wait, Krystal,
going
can I
to.
ask you? Did you think that there was any chance that libs were gonna be like, unburn the Teslas? We should open them. We should accept them with open arms. I struggle with like Ro Khanna.
Leaders.
Yeah, the politicians, the wealthy politicians, they're like, sure.
And I actually think, Pisco, I think that's part of what Elon realized is like, fuck, I did a Nazi salute. These liberals are not taking me back. So, it's a 2-party system, outside of his fantasies about we'll start the new moderate party. Okay. Moderate led by a guy who does Nazi salutes and backs the AfD in Germany. Okay. But, you've got 2 choices. You can be, 3. You can be, totally transactional and you're giving money to both sides. Plenty of people do that. You can be all in with the Democrats or you can be all in with the Republicans. And you have burned the bridge so thoroughly with the Democrats that it would be a litmus test in Democratic primaries if you had a candidate that took his money at this point. It would not be acceptable at all. And so I think probably when he came down from whatever bender he was on, he had that realization of like, only thing I can't, like, I already burned the bridge with the liberals, and now I called this guy a file. Like, I am completely screwed.
He needs...
And, oh, by the way, outside of the toxic branding, the Chinese EVs are kicking Tesla's ass, too.
Kicking ass.
Way outside of the U.S., where we basically can't buy them. BYD is leaps and bounds ahead of them, more affordable, and his brand is also toasted in different places around the world. So he's, like, screwed on a bunch of fronts when it comes to Tesla.
Honestly, the litmus test for me, he should be in prison. And every single Democrat who's running for president in 2028 should have to say, I think Elon Musk should be in prison. Because we can't just forget about what he actually did. Put the Nazi salutes aside, which are bad enough, right? But there's nothing criminal about that. It is criminal to illegally cut pediatric cancer research and Meals on Wheels and destroy the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and fire nuclear safety officials, including our top guy, who they had to beg to come back, destroyed FEMA, Department of Education, fired 83,000 veterans, cut half the Social Security offices in the country, fired 250,000 public workers. All of this illegally, by the way, because he does not have power of the purse. Congress decides something, the president signs it, that's it. It's the law. You can't have the world's richest robber baron go in there and cut whatever he wants to cut. They got rid of food safety inspectors and air traffic controllers. Like, it's so crazy that the conversation is, should we allow him back into the arena and give us money? It's like, no, he needs to go to prison, bro.
Yeah.
Do you not understand this?
I struggle with Ro Khanna because on some things I think that Ro Khanna makes a lot of sense, and so maybe you guys can be my guidepost here. But when he says that stuff about Elon Musk, I'm just like, dude, come on.
Insane.
We feel the same
no,
way.
it's insane. And so there's a funny
What are you
meme.
thinking?
There's a funny meme that it says the Ro Khanna cycle, and it's a picture of Ro Khanna, and there's like a bunch of question marks, and there's an arrow to another bunch of question marks, and there's an arrow to another bunch of question marks. Because it's like, what are you doing?
He's a smart dude. I've talked to him, and he seems like a very smart dude, very capable. But then every now and then he'll say something like this, and I'm just like, why the fuck would Democrats embrace Elon Musk? Why is that smart?
Elon is a particular problem for him because at the beginning of Doge, he was like, "Oh, we should see if we could work." It was
I like
one of
efficiency.
Those,
I like efficiency. Don't you?
I argued with him on Breaking Points about this, and actually, I think he reached out to me because he saw my comments about this with the Vanguard guys.
Oh, the Vanguard boys! I saw them roasting him.
And so he saw me talking to them about it, and he was like, "You make some good points, but I come on Breaking Points, and we can talk about it." So he'll probably be on with us next week.
He's gonna still take the opposite side of that shit.
Well, I don't know.
Really?
Oh, this is what he's doing if he does that.
I don't know. I think we'll probably have him
Dig
on
that
and see what he's
hole.
got to say about it at this point.
The thing is, Krystal, you're really good at those kinds of interviews. Also, but before
nice
I
of you to say.
end,
Thank you.
I think you are. And it reminds me, before I end, do we have a Cenk Uygur update in terms of whether or not they're going to cut military spending? Like, what's going on with TYT? Can we get him to come around? Can we get him,
It was hard watching that, given that I literally knew, as a matter of fact, that they were going to raise the military budget, it was tough watching him swear up and down like, no, there's a chance. Maybe.
But do you think that we can reach out? Because I think that when I watch those Piers Morgan debates, and now I guess Piers Morgan has come around on Palestine.
Yeah.
When Cenk Uyghur's on your side, just like, by the way, when you two are on my side, there are some things I think that we still disagree on. But whenever you guys are on my side, whenever Cenk's on my side, I cheer. And I think it's awesome to have people who are able to stand on business, which for the longest time, Cenk was such a person for me. But yeah, I'm just wondering if there's any hope to get the old Cenk back to get him to realize that this appeal to MAGA-ism, this appeal to Trumpism is not worth his time.
I'm still holding out hope.
Yeah, the thing is, there's always two paths after an election loss, right? One of the paths is, hey, fuck you and the horse you rode in on, I'm still right, and you'll realize that eventually. That's one of the paths. That's the path I took. The other path is, hey, maybe we should be a little more open-minded and open-hearted and see where these people are coming from, and maybe you get more bees with honey, or however the fucking saying goes, right? And, that's the path he went down. And I don't know, something about this last election, to me it seems so obvious that let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya and try to work through it cordially, that was so not the way to go that it was just astonishing that anybody would go down that path. And so it was difficult to watch for that reason.
For me, there are some things that are just out of bounds, politically should be out of bounds. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about him mobilizing Marines against American citizens for no reason.
There's no...
And threatening to do so across the country, and threatening the Insurrection Act, and threatening to arrest Gavin Newsom, and, the tariffs are insane. I mean, it's all so outside of what is acceptable. I mean, the whole project of Doge, I'm going to hand over the government to the richest man on the planet to do what... That to me is not let's see where we can overlap.
Right, yeah.
That's you have to reject this project out of hand because it's so un-American. I mean, it's so contrary to the best ideals of this country that you cannot give it any sort of credence, any sort of credit, or play ball at all, because the whole concept of handing the government over to an unelected oligarch, richest man on the planet should not be something that's on the table at all.
And the thing is, we already knew as a matter of fact that there was a 0% chance Trump was going to be populist or anti-war. And I say that because the best predictor of future action is past action, and we had his whole first term to look at to see what did he do.
Right.
And what he did was standard far-right Republican bullshit.
Yeah.
Let me cut taxes for the rich. Let me deregulate. Let me do more bombings. Let me do more war.
And we had Project 2025, which was all about, hey, you know how Trump 1.0 was extreme? Trump 2.0 is going to be that on steroids and with zero guardrails. So, yeah, it was not a surprise.
And I think that you guys are impartial enough that if he were to do great things, we'll definitely call it out when we see it, and we'll definitely give him his kudos where it deserves. So if he had brokered some amazing peace deal in Gaza, I know that you guys would be giving him credit for that. If he had, instituted some really populist left-wing economic policies, I know that you guys would have been giving him credit for that, but we just can't give credit in advance. And so, yeah, I appreciate you guys saying that.
Yeah, I mean, in the first term, there were examples every now and then where I'd be like, oh, shit, okay. When he pardoned Alice Johnson.
Yeah, First Step
when
Act.
He did the First Step Act. When he actually got rid of TPP, although he did do a new NAFTA and there were some of the original TPP provisions in there. But, yeah, there were instances in the first term where you're like, he banned bump stocks for guns. I was like, cool, great, that's awesome. But this time, there's literally nothing.
Shit, I'm going to challenge you now, Kyle. So what is your favorite thing that Trump has done in the second term? Can you praise a single action of Trump 2.0? Not a single one. You can't think of anything that you like.
I haven't seen a single thing where I go...
Didn't he do an executive order against paper straws?
Krystal actually unironically loves that. I really don't give a shit. I don't care. But yeah, paper straws are slightly annoying, but I'm over it.
I think the pennies thing is based. I think he's trying to ban pennies. I think that's pretty base. I don't like the way he's doing it. But like everything, he's trying to subvert Congress because Congress is supposed to be in charge of the coinage and shit. But yeah, Krystal, can you think of something that you actually like from Trump 2.0?
Well,
she said the paper straws.
Yeah, paper straws. I liked this week. He said that he thought Israel had enough problems without kidnapping Greta Thunberg.
True. Based.
Okay, accurate.
Yeah, he says funny things sometimes. But I knew from the day one of this administration. First of all, he signed a record number of executive orders on day one. And then when you looked at them, it was raising drug prices and getting rid of all of the anti-corruption rules for everybody in his cabinet. And I remember reading that going like, am I the only one seeing this? Why is everybody acting like what's happening now is normal? Like, this is fucking crazy. This is crazy. So yeah, I can't think of a single thing. Came in the horse he rode it on. He's the worst. And he's only getting worse as time goes by. He's only getting worse. It's getting worse and worse and worse every day.
Yeah, I think it's just as his political standing slides, I think it's just going to continue to get more and more, aggressive, crackdown, authoritarian, et cetera.
You said that would happen.
We're seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Pisco, thanks for joining us, man. Tell everybody again where they can find you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys. And y'all should really, I'm sure you are already, but follow Krystal and Kyle on all the platforms. Give them all your money. I'm Pisco. You can find me at Pisco's Hour on YouTube or Pisco Liddy on Twitter. And yeah, thanks again for having me. I love these conversations.
Yeah, you're doing great. It's been fun to watch you, Pisco, and learn more about you and see you in action, because I do think you're so good in a debate setting. I'm trying to learn from some of your tactics. So great to see you. Great to chat with you.
Going into Tim Pool's Lion's Den with 7 people.
You did so good.
Yeah, good job. Good job.